What's going on, guys? Matt at Middleton Motorsports here. Got another dyno video for you here today. 2016 Mustang GT up on the dyno right now. So let's go up there and take a look at what we got. So this car came to us for a couple issues, no start and a check engine light. So what I had found, and I'll preface this with, we didn't do any of the work on this car. He just brought it to us to fix the issues he was having. So it had some throttle body codes, and actually ended up what happening was the throttle body wiring harness adapter that Whipple sends with these kits, this is a stage 2 kit with the bigger throttle body, had some damage to it. So we got a new one of those from Whipple. I installed that because it was setting some throttle circuit codes. And he also just had a battery issue, just needed a new battery. So obviously stage 2 Whipple system on this car. It does also have Kooks long tube headers on it. So those are, basically the Whipple's the big mod on it. But yeah, it does have headers, and it's got a Magnaflow muffler system on it. So it has it's got a fuel pump booster, the Whipple Stage 2 injectors. So nothing too crazy here from a standpoint of, like a big fancy build or extensive build on something like this. Stock Gen 2 engine, again, 2016. So this is the non-direct injected version of the Coyote engine. These take boost really well, 11.5 to 1 compression on these cars. And this also does have, if you guys did notice when I had the camera over here, it does have a 10 rib conversion on it. So ATI balancer, and it's got a 10 rib upper from Whipple. Still stock stage 2 pulley ratio on this. So still seeing about 10 pounds of boost. I usually try to check these things with a mechanical gauge just to make sure they're making the boost that they should. There is no map sensor, so there is no absolute way of measuring the boost pressure through the ECU. It's an inferred value on these, and it uses basically the airflow model. So when I first started dynoing this car, or I should say street driving this car, the first time I rolled onto the throttle, I was seeing on the ECU in my data logger, on the HP tuner stuff, I was seeing almost 17 pounds of boost. So I came back to the shop, and I knew it had the 10 rib setup on it. And I started looking at the pulleys. I'm like, yeah, this should not be making 17 pounds of boost. This should be the standard Whipple 10 pounds. Well, it turned out somebody else had been in the tune, and somebody else had been messing with the injector data, and they had the injector data skewed, so the ECU was basically thinking there was a lot more fuel flow than there actually was, which is screwing with the fuel and air model, and it was estimating way more boost than it actually has. So I got that fixed. I got the tune-up all fixed up on it. It's running really nice now. I've done 6-7 pulls on this because there was quite a few things kind of screwy with the timing tables, and again, that fueling stuff was off. So this one I had to do a little bit more work on than I normally do on just a basic Whipple header deal, but it's all squared away now. So we can take a look at where I'm at. This is 91 octane on this car, and I always like to point out the fueling because the fuel quality makes a massive difference on these boosted Coyotes because of the compression ratio, and just the amount of boost we're running through these, these 8 to 10 pound systems on pump gas. The timing is very, very, very sensitive. And the HDFX system that Ford uses on these for timing, where it uses those 4 knock sensors, and it's constantly adding and removing timing, it's very sensitive to fuel octane. So I always like to point out what we're using for fuel, and this is a 91 octane car. So I'm really happy where we're at with getting closer to that 700 mark. Usually these Whipple kits, these stage 2 Whipple kits with headers, I end up between 650 and 700 depending on the fuel. It just can kind of vary. You take a Gen 3 car, it's 12 to 1, and you got the 10 pounds of boost, and you're trying to run that at 91 octane. Sometimes they actually, in the Gen 2 motor, or the Gen 3 motors, make more power, but when you're trying to put boost on them and that much boost, you end up with a really low timing curve, like 13, 14 degrees. The Gen 2 engines being 11.5 to 1, slightly lower compression at the same boost level. Again, when we're octane limited, you can usually put a little more timing in them. This is 15, 16, depending on what the timing system's doing. And again, I usually try to command around 15 to 16 because that's basically where they like to be. 91, again, I'll keep saying that 91 number. because the 91 versus a 93, 10% ethanol makes quite a bit of difference on a car like this. It can be 20 horsepower on these setups, on these boosted Coyotes. So I know you get on the internet and everyone's making big 900 wheel, but that's all E85 and that's all high octane, and that's not what we're dealing with on this particular car. And not a lot of guys, you know, there's a lot of places in the country that you guys get E85 at almost every station. Here in Madison, Wisconsin, we only have a handful of stations around the city where E85 is offered. So guys often have to drive out of their way to get it. So a lot of guys don't want to do that. They're not racing the car, it's a street car. So they just want to be able to pull up to any gas station, and we basically only have 91. There's a few stations again that have the 93 E10. So unfortunately, we're kind of screwed on fuel quality where we are. So a lot of the local guys want 91, and they want to be able to drive them around and not have to think about the fuel they're putting in them. So, and that makes a difference on the tuning. So this is where we're at so far, 684, 539 torque. And you can kind of see the waviness of the graph. You can see how that timing system is kind of, you know, taking and adding a little bit. But I'm going to set the camera down. We're going to do one more pull on it, and it's still pretty warm. I just did a pull about 10 minutes ago, and these are all hot pulls. This does have a thermostat. I'll mention too. I forgot to mention that on the preface earlier in the video. This does have a thermostat in it too, and it's got a 180 thermostat in it. So it's running. I'm making sure that every single dyno pull, the coolant temperature is 180 and the cylinder head temp is about 190 for every single pull I've done. So I always try to keep temperatures always the same every pull, so it's not a variable, because again, octane limitations, a hotter engine with a higher compression and octane limited boost. Once you get into this 200, 205 coolant temp, they won't quite take as much timing as 185, 180, 185. So, and that again, 1 degree of timing in this area. And since we're talking about timing, I'm going to bring up the previous dynograph where that was an earlier pull. Same temperature, same temperature, same everything. This was just about a degree less of timing. So you can see a degree of timing at the peak was 13 horsepower. And if we really get into it, I know this run here, this last run I just did, make sure I've got the camera pointing where I need to be. I'm going to bring the cursor up. This red run I did, the last one I just did, was about 15 and a half to 16 degree timing up through here. This blue run was like 14 and a half. So degree and a half less. And you can see that's 20 horsepower there. That's about 21 horsepower there. So a degree of timing is going a long way right here. And that's just 1 degree of timing, literally. So it's 15 to 20 horsepower. So again, when we're talking octane and boost on these higher compression engines, the timing is huge, makes a huge difference. Thus why, one reason why E85 goes so much farther. Obviously the cooling effect of E85 is one part of it, but also the amount of timing you can add. You get into E85 on these cars, and now we're talking, 20, 21 degrees of timing, maybe even a little more. And you can see, we're adding just 1 degree of timing, you add 5 degrees of timing. Well, now we're talking 80 horsepower. So with the cooling effect on top of it. So, but enough rambling about all that. I'm going to close this run. I'm just going to bring up that last one I did. I'm going to set the camera down here, and we'll do one last pull, and hopefully we match this. This 684 was my best so far. I had good timing. The NOx sensors only pulled about a half a degree. It's where I want it to be, and I got the cam angles where I want them. So we'll do one more, and we'll take a look at that, and we'll take a look at the data log and kind of go over that a little bit, and we'll get this one back on the road for the guy and move on to the next car. But for now, let's spin this one up one more time. final pull there, we lost a little bit, but we can look at the data log and I'll show you where. 681, 525, so we definitely lost some through the mid-range, but I'll show you where it did pull some more timing there. And that was kind of a back-to-back pull, so we had a little more heat in the blower. So I was about a half a degree to a degree less kind of across the board. But again, I'm still happy with that number. We're still real close up at the top here where it was. It was right off the hit, it was kind of pulling some timing in the mid-range right off the hit, and it was starting to bring it back in the mid-range. But that high degree of freedom effects system on the way the Ford ECUs pull timing and add timing, there's some variability to it. So I'm good with this on 91 octane for the boost we're at on a setup like this for sure. This car does have high flow cats, so we don't have a full free flowing exhaust. Again, it does have long tube headers, but it does have a high flow catalytic converter, which does restrict some of the flow. And we, without cats on it, we might even be able to see a close to a 700 number on something like this, usually where we're at. But for what it is, I'm good. So let's take a look. These setups I'll usually command them richer. 0.78 for lambda is where I usually command. That is low 11s if you guys want to talk air fuel ratio. I don't like talking air fuel ratio because there's too many variabilities in air fuel ratio. If you're straight gasoline, obviously 14.7 is the stoic point, but then you get into 10% ethanol and the stoic point's 14.0, and then you go to E85 and the stoic point is 9.8, whatever, depending on it's 70% or 80%. And so the air fuel ratio, for me, there's too much variability in it. And lambda, there is no variability when it comes to gasoline and ethanol mixes. So there's very little. So anyway, I keep talking about this this HDFX system, and so HDFX it's called High Degree of Freedom Executive, and that's Ford's basically what they call their on these Coyote systems, their timing system. So on the Coyote ECUs, and some of that I shouldn't say that because some of that does go back to even the I want to say the Copperhead stuff earlier, like Gen 1 Coyote, the GT500s that were 5.4s and 5.8s, like the 07 to 14s, use a similar system. And that might have been just on some of the later, like 12 and up, 10 and up, something like that. But anyway, it's basically a system they use. They got NOx sensors, and the NOx sensors are the spark and the fueling, and the fueling's separate, but the spark is also like a closed loop. So it's constantly trying to run in between, and I might have talked about this before on some of the channels. I'll bring HB tuners up. So basically you got your borderline and you got your MBT. So borderline is kind of where the lower point where you'd run, like where it wants to run timing on the borderline octane. So the bottom 91 octane. MBT is maximum brake torque. So that's basically the theoretical point for timing where the engine's going to make the maximum amount of torque or power. And so the system, will, when you go wide open throttle, and it's kind of a reset every time you flash the tune, it's going to basically go onto the borderline. And then as it learns, and we're going to kind of bounce back and forth here. And I might not be logging sparks, or no, I am. Okay, so you can see here spark source is borderline. So it's referencing those borderline tables. And this is during the pull. This is the wide open throttle. So it's referencing those borderline tables. Now, it's gonna even from those borderline tables, it still can. There's an octane modifier and that's gonna kind of play into the whole deal. And I hope I'm explaining this okay because it's kind of complicated, but there's a lot to it and I'm trying to simplify it a little bit. We're on the borderline. It still will take or add timing away. So you can see on this pull here, the other thing with this car, and I'm kind of throwing more into the bag of stuff here, but there is an exhaust rattle in the back, and I think I'm getting some intermittent where it's touching hangers is touching the frame, the rear subframe, and I'm getting some intermittent false knock on this car, so I was battling that. And it's kind of coming up on the dyno here, because this car I was having a lot of variability on how much timing this is pulling. That 684 run, it pulled maybe a half a degree the whole run. Some of the other runs I was getting like 2 degrees of timing. Here you can see I think it got into that a little bit, because some of the other runs I made at these lower RPMs from 3 to 4,000, it was pulling that, like it was up here, it was only, there it was actually adding it back in. It was only pulling a half to 3/10, which is fine with me. I like it to float kind of between, sometimes maybe it'll pull a degree. I don't like seeing the HDFX system pull more than a degree. If it's pulling more than a degree, then I'll just go back in the borderline tables and pull more out. But once you do, and that's the trick with dynoing these Coyote cars, and along with GT500s and GT350s, any of these V8 Mustangs, and well, the EcoBoost stuff does the same thing also, is when you flash a tune, it's going to revert right back to the borderline tables. So, but once you start, if I did 10 dyno pulls in a row, the knock correction, it would learn, the modifier for the timing would learn, and it would basically bring its base timing down to a learned value, and it would basically, it's going to just trim the timing until it doesn't see any more knock. Or if I have it, let's say I have the borderline set lower and it's not seeing any knock, it'll start adding timing automatically through the knock system, through the HDFX system. It'll start to bring the timing in. So you can see at the end here, it actually started to add the timing, and you can see the timing came up to 16, almost 17. So, so I'm going to save this run. So I'm just going to show you some other runs I did. Hopefully I saved them. I'm going to save this one. So I usually save not all my runs, but sorry guys, let me just open this, not save it. We already saved it. So we'll open this other run I did a couple, 3-4 pulls ago. And I was playing with some cam angles and stuff like that too, but and that one was kind of doing the same thing, but you can see where down at the bottom here, make sure the camera's on the screen, it was actually adding a little bit. And the intake air temp was a little cooler at 73 versus those other runs I just did were at like 90. So, that's going to affect the timing also. There are tables for IAT, but when you start talking, again, limited octane, every little bit of this counts, and every little bit makes a big difference. So, but you can kind of see how it floats. So, it's adding timing, and then it starts seeing a little more knock, and it takes timing away, and then it adds it back in as it sees fit. So, yeah, that's just how these systems work. What happens though is if I were to do, if let's say this is going to continue, let's say it didn't have an exhaust rattle and I had a similar knock every time, again, it's going to kind of pull the timing back. But let's say that I had the borderline tables really low and it wasn't seeing any knock. There's tables in here for how much it'll actually, the HDFX system will start to add timing back in. So there's limit tables and there's rate tables, how fast it adds it back in. I don't usually play with a whole lot of that too much. The factory has it pretty figured out. Sometimes, in some extreme stuff, you can kind of mess around with that a little bit, but so you can see it's going to pull as much as 6 degrees. It'll advance as much as 2. When it starts advancing, and it's going to start to trying to go towards these MBT tables. So these MBT tables are always going to be higher than the borderline tables, quite a bit. Usually, the factory usually will have them 5-6 degrees higher than the borderline tables. There's also going to be like cylinder pressure limit tables and lambda modifier for MBT and borderline. So there's a whole bunch of other stuff like correction and modifiers, but I'm trying to just kind of touch on the basics here, where when I talk HDFX, I've talked about it in the videos before. And when we look at dyno graphs, and again, I keep mentioning octane, we're talking these octane limited setups where we're trying to put boost on top of a high compression engine. A lot of guys just talk boost, but the timing is huge on these, and that dyno pull shows it. So, so we made, you know, almost 14 less foot-pounds of torque. So, and I believe the last run I saved, so, you know, this mid-range here where we peak torque, I'm looking at the graph here and talking, we peak torque at, you know, between 4,800 and 5,500-ish, somewhere, but depending on the two runs. So we were here, you can see this pull, we were 15.2, somewhere in there, in that peak torque range. This is the other run. You can see we were, you know, 16. So not even a degree of timing in that mid-range made a 14 foot-pound difference of torque. So this is that other run I had up that where it made 684 and 530. The torque number was really nice. And you can see where it just didn't pull as much timing. And the timing was up to 16 versus, and I'll open the other log file back up, 14.8, 15.0, you know, kind of in that. So a degree of timing is huge. And so sometimes when I talk to these guys with these Whipple cars, and even a lot of the time I'll even recommend going up a pulley size, going to a 4-inch pulley, and the cars will make similar power, if not more, because you take a pound of boost away. Okay, so you lose 15 to 20 horsepower off the pound of boost, but we can pick up the 15 to 20 horsepower and foot-pounds and torque with another degree of timing. There's less cylinder pressure, we can run more timing, and it's a safer deal. So the supercharger manufacturers get into this, and everyone wants to talk boost, and they want to talk, you know, let's flash a bunch of timing into it, because what can happen, and what I was trying to get to before, is you put a bunch of timing in the borderline, you flash the car, the HDFX system resets, the octane modifier goes to 0, and the car is going to try to run, the ECU is going to try to put in the timing you have in the borderline table. And if the car's cooled off and the supercharger is cool, it might take that timing. So now you have something that's cooled off overnight, they throw a tune in it with a bunch of borderline timing in it, and it's going to make a big number, a big hero pull. But you get it on the street and you do 6, 8, 10 wide open throttle pulls, or you run it through the gears 5 times. Well, the HDFX system now is going to pull, you know, now it's going to start to learn, you know, a degree every pull. It's going to pull a degree and then pull a degree, and all of a sudden now it's making 50 horsepower less. So you put it back on the dyno, and now instead of 720 at the wheels or 750 on pump gas that some of these people want to advertise, it's now making what I just made. So, which is pointless, because you take it to the track and it doesn't run like a 750 wheel car, it runs like a 680 wheel car, and it's like, what the heck's going on? I thought this car made all this power. So, and again, I'm talking pump gas, guys, here. I'm not talking E85. E85 changes the whole game. It flips the script on everything. A car like this won't knock on E85. It just won't. There's too much octane, there's too much cooling. You can run it up till it stops making power, and that's usually 20, 22 degrees of timing, depending on the boost and the setup, you know, whether it's a Gen 2 or Gen 3 car. Anyway, I'm rambling. I'm happy where this is at, 91 octane. I thought I'd just try to share a little bit of this insight, more of this insight. That's what I try to do on these behind the tune videos, is trying to talk about this stuff. And I really would like guys to ask questions in the comments. If anybody watches these videos that is interested in tuning, I try to kind of pull the curtain back on some of this stuff and all this stuff you see on the internet and all these big, huge numbers, and everybody's making 900 horsepower on 87 octane, and you know, with this basic setup, and it runs a 480, 6130, whatever. I mean, I get there's all sorts of cars out there that are fast, and you know, my personal GT 500 is a big number car, but it's on E85. We've had guys bring GT 500s to us, and I'll talk a little bit about that too, where hey, it made 820 at the wheels on this guy's dyno. We don't even touch it. I don't touch the tune. I don't touch anything on the car. We put it on our dyno, it makes 750. And he's like, what the heck's wrong with it? And so I do a data log, and I'm like, well, it's, you know, I pull the tune and do a data log. I'm like, well, it's running 3-4 degrees less timing than what it was being commanded in the tune, because you're on pump gas, and you know, you put some 91 in it, and you drove it around, you raced it, whatever, and it pulled all the timing back out of it. So it's just, it is what it is. It's, you know, I get power sells packages and sells cars, but track numbers don't lie. So So I'm gonna wrap this up. I'm done talking about this. Sometimes I vent about it a little bit because it gets a little frustrating when guys want to come to me and talk about, you know, well, it made this much power on this dyno and this car made this much power and whatever. So anyway, I'm happy with this. I'm good with this. And I'll quickly touch on RPM too. I don't know if this car has oil pump gears in it or not. Anytime we do, I shouldn't say anytime we do a Whipple. If a guy's gonna race a supercharged car, supercharged Coyote, you know, any of them, I highly recommend doing oil pump gears. You start banging these off the, especially a stick shift car like this, you start banging these off the rev limiter with the factory oil pump gears, even if you set the rev limiter low, it will break the oil pump. You do it enough times and you whack that limiter. So the limiter on this is 7,600. I could set it higher. It would probably make a little bit more power out here if we revved it to 8, but that just stuff starts to make me nervous with a factory oil pump. Now, if it had an oil pump in it, I would definitely rev it to 8. I'm gonna advise this guy, he watches that limiter pretty closely, because the automatic cars you don't really have to worry about as much unless you're really blowing the tires off in the street and you're losing the tire and the shifts aren't set up right and it'll just whack the limiter. But the stick shift cars, it's really easy. You know, you whack the throttle on this car, this thing has factory 255s on it, Pirellis, it will instantly go to the limiter in first and second gear real quick, so you gotta be really careful. So with that being said, I just didn't want to take it too much higher than this. Just makes me a little nervous. I'm conservative and I don't like breaking people's stuff, and I don't want to see them break it, you know, after it's been here. So otherwise I'm good. Good power curve for 91 octane. Obviously I did a lot of cleaning up on this tune, fixed it up. So that's going to do it for this video, guys. Thanks for listening to the rambling on the timing. Hopefully you guys learned a little bit. Again, if you guys have questions, comments, I like seeing negative or positive, you know, positive obviously, but I like seeing negative comments too, so we can maybe rebuttal back and forth and talk about stuff and have a discussion. So check out our social media. We got a lot of other builds going on. We got the truck builds going on, the Outlaw stuff. Huge demand for those. I got some Camaros. You might have seen, I got this ZL1 over here. Callaway deal, another Callaway deal. I got to get that fixed. Same customer has another ZL1 1LE that we're going to do a package on also. And obviously more Mustangs coming down the pipe. So that'll wrap it up for this one, guys. Thanks for watching, and we'll talk to you guys later.